Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Hell is for Children, a Blog Talk Radio program for and by protective mothers with your host, Geerte Franken. So what's a protective mother? A protective mother tries to protect her child or children from their abusive father by many means necessary. Yes, you can call in. Are you ready? Operation Expose continues.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hey everybody, and welcome to Hell is for Children. This show is on every Saturday at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time, and the call-in number is 347-850-1243, and you can call in during the second hour of the show. I'd like to start thanking Bobby Biesinger from World Integrity News Network for providing us with this platform that allows anyone who has input on the topic of protective mothers and can think along with us towards solutions to have their voice heard. And today's guest is protective mother Melissa Barnett, and she is a wonderful, persistent activist who runs the organization Mothers of Lost Children. You can find the website of this organization at www.mothersoflostchildren.org. So Mothers of Lost Children demonstrates at the White House every year to fight for the plight of protective mothers. And the organization fights for change in many other ways as well. So I'm very honored to have Melissa Barnett on the show today. Hello, Melissa, can you hear me?
Yes, Geerte, I can hear you.
Hi, Melissa. Welcome to Hell is for Children. I wanted to start... Yes, thanks for being on. I wanted to start with asking you if you can share with the audience what happened to you as a protective mother and how you and your daughter came to be in the situation you both find yourself in today.
Sure. Where to begin is always a challenge for moms. We often see somewhat the writing on the wall, but we push past our fears. I married in 2000, and I had a child who was 12 from a first marriage, and I was very busy in the community. I started a teen center, and I was active. I worked for the state, various jobs, and I was volunteering, and I had gone back to school to become a kindergarten teacher, and I wasn't really, I was kind of asleep to some of the behaviors that were happening in my home, and I have a lot of guilt and shame about those events when my son disclosed that his stepfather was introducing him to pornography. And this was on the heels of some growing violence and that coercive control. He was the classic narcissistic sociopath, highly manipulative, very smart. He was the manager of the Merrill Lynch in Napa. When I first met him, I was seeking funding for some of my kid programs. Who knew? And in my naivete, I just wasn't really aware of this particular situation. So when I was seeking support and services, I went to lawyers in the area about a month before I separated, and people who were well-versed, I thought, in domestic violence. I went to the domestic violence services. I was turned away over and over again. There didn't seem to be a clear understanding of what was happening, and maybe I couldn't articulate it at that time. I was still in this place of confusion, and I was still waving white flags, trying to fix things at home, and starting to go down this path nothing was really clear until there was some physical violence. He trapped me in the bathroom with my daughter, swinging a bat in the house, and I called. I was still trying to fix things. I call his best friend, who's now like the president of the Bar Association. And
oh, no.
Right? Try to get him to talk him down and talk some sense into him. And then eventually I call the police, and the police come to the home, and they just, as classic as any small town, they talk me into not prosecuting or filing charges, and they convince him to leave. And I then plan to move out. And in the moving out is when I discovered mountains and mountains of pornography. And it's then that my son starts disclosing, classic, when moms move out of the house and the children begin to feel a sense of safety. Mm-hmm. That's when they disclose, and that's the trap for many mothers, because the system isn't, when I say prepared, I look at that whole minding the gap between services to get moms out and their kids to safety. Then what happens next? And that's what I fell into, was that gap. And whether it's intended to be there, that's what I would later learn. But at that point, I was scratching my head, why isn't anybody helping me and my kids? Mm-hmm. And why am, so, it was really startling, the amount of evidence that I had then going into, excuse me, I get nervous, telling your personal story. For so long I've been telling other people's stories, so I have to.
Well, that's why we have you on today. That's why we have you on, because you do so much for other moms, and it's like, well, really, Melissa, what's your story? So we're so excited to finally hear your story. So I understand it's hard. I know it's nerve-wracking to get into it, and you kind of relive it as you tell it too, so it's very emotional, yeah. But you're doing great, so continue.
Well, and there is this background, that leads up to when we say, how did you lose custody? It's like, well, there was all of this meluge before that you were kind of suffering through in silence. And I think many, many women, I think especially, I've been doing a lot of work with Aaliyah looking at this secret group of, white women who suffer in silence, that hidden population where there are really no services. And once you divorce or bifurcate, the only place where you had any protection under the law was as a married woman. And once you separate, once you legally end that relationship, you're now in these family courts, and they're doing the bidding in these pay-to-play courts of of this entitled white man. And the system is set up to do that. They're set up to punish women and get them back into control. And that's part of this system of the patriarchy. And we're just unaware of it until it happens to us. And that's part of it, is we can see when it's various issues of injustice in our system and racial issues and all of that, and we can be present for that and help and all of that. But when it happens in this particular population, I'm Jewish and I'm Mexican. I don't look it. So when people are unaware, and I certainly don't, it's not a protected class to be this mixed person and who looks mostly like a white woman. They imagine that we have privileges when in fact we don't. We may even in fact suffer even more because of this hidden and secret oppression that's happening. So when I entered into my first experience entering into an ex parte motion, my ex with lots of money, power, I was told by his attorney that he was a pillar of society. I'm looking at mountains and mountains of pornography and emails where he's posted on Craigslist that he's, going to help new gay men learn how to give DJs. I'm going like, wow, are you not aware of what your client's doing? This pillar of society who's on the board of the Boys and Girls Club and all of these different programs. Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. And every program that I was involved in, I was in music and drama, and I was running all sorts of programs. So he assumed all of that opportunity. He then did things at our temple. He had, the Jewish wife. So this was now a new entree to new business. This was all about business for him.
Yeah, it's all about reputation. Yeah.
Absolutely. That character that he had to maintain. And so the very first thing that they do is this character assassination, which I was completely unaware of. And the attorney I got, after going through dozens of attorneys who all were mysteriously conflicted, and I learned that if you have money, the strategy is to go to every attorney who could possibly challenge you in court. So that's what he did. Went to dozens of attorneys. So I went out of county, and the attorney I chose was much like myself, a real believer in arbitration and mediation, and we don't have to go to court. Let's address these issues. And let's protect the child. My ex at first agreed to some voluntary supervised visitation with a friend, but then he got this attorney who was a buddy of his, a client on the board of the Boys and Girls Club, and went into court, got an ex parte motion, sealed all the documents that I had to prove all of this abuse, and gave him unsupervised visitation, set up a schedule, a quickie kind of schedule. This is in like a domestic violence kind of a court, one of these brief things. So, and set a court date for 4 months out. And when I went to court, the attorney I had was actually, he thought we were going for temporary child support during this time, when in fact it was a full-blown child custody hearing. And I'm sitting there in the lobby trying to explain to my attorney as I'm looking at the documents we were just handed, saying, oh no, this is a hearing. And he's saying, you're not listening. You're not listening.
Oh no.
We're not doing that. And sure enough, so then we get a recess, and I'm scrambling to get witnesses for that afternoon. And I managed to get a couple of excellent witnesses, and it just didn't matter in these courts, is what I came to realize. Hearing after hearing, I had witnesses who spoke with my children, who looked at the evidence. There had already been 3 CPS reports done. They allowed the CPS documents to come into court. The judge virtually ignored all that and in the end ordered 50-50 custody, but she stated that that was her bias and that none of this interfered with his ability to parent. And that was a really, really hard pill to swallow, that this man was now going to have unsupervised visitation with my 4-year-old, who was already exhibiting some behaviors that were, sexualized behaviors. And I was looking at these mountains of documents, and there was physical abuse and emotional abuse. My son was very depressed. And I was afraid of what was coming next. And what was coming next was he would eke away at custody. He would stalk me. He would harass me. I would be in court every couple of months. until he was getting what he wanted, and that was to make it appear that I was unstable, that I was malicious, that I was vindictive, and all along he was working to marginalize me. I wasn't needed. He could replace me with this girlfriend or that one, and by the time a couple years rolled around and this was continuing and more abuse was happening and there was more disclosure, sadly, I was working for CASA. I was a volunteer coordinator, and I met some of the minors' councils, and I was unaware of what was really happening under the surface. I'm thinking that by getting an order for a minors' council, someone to represent the voice of my child, since I was doing such a poor job, and I was totally disregarded, that this person would actually stand up on my child's behalf. And no, and just like most of the moms, this was a pivotal point in the case where she would begin to advocate on behalf of the father to get full custody. Yep. And and during this time, that's when my daughter reports to her teacher. She's in the 2nd grade, and she tells the teacher that her dad's hurting her and she wants it to stop. And this was a full-blown, I was teaching at this school, and this was a full-blown, investigation. The school was involved. He threatened the school to, that if they didn't fire me, that he would sue the school. And he went after a couple of the teachers who also were reporting. And I was a kindergarten teacher, and I worked in the after-school care program, and I had various roles in the school. So I was put on administrative leave and eventually let out of my contract.
Wow.
And, I mean, I did my due diligence. I'm a mandated reporter. The child reported in some detail. And knowing and in good faith, I reported. Yep. And what would happen after that, is CPS would do a very brief, very cursory investigation. And as many know, one of the policies with CPS is if there is an open family court case, they refer back to family court. They sent it to the DA. And this is one of these details in my case that if I had the means to go after some of these judges, and I'm always looking at creative ways to do it, the judge at this point is, backing up. The DA, when all of this evidence came into the police department when my son was reporting abuse, that DA ended up being a judge.
What?
On our case. Yes.
Oh, my gosh.
He ended up being a judge on the case. And this is one of those things. It's the DA's responsibility to further investigate and to it's law enforcement. They're supposed to be the ones. CPS is this other, it's a strange department, but when the DA refuses to investigate issues of violence against women and children, this is how we're in trouble. And it's, policy. We can break it down. We can say, well, once again, this is this patriarchy, and depending on who the DA is, we're starting to see better law enforcement doing better things in some of the counties, and we have to start looking at those best practices as things are changing. And I think it's the people, not the policies. It's the individuals that we find working in the system that are helping mothers and children, just like you and I are doing our best to advocate and expose this story. There are these various people in the system, and we have to celebrate them. But I didn't find them. In my case, I had the DA turned judge who then eventually gave him full custody, first gave him medical custody, and then gave him full custody, and I went from being with my child a good part of the time, not just 50-50, but she would come with me after school or different things. But now I would see her every other weekend, and my daughter would lose 2.5 grade levels in 3 months' time and 25 pounds.
Oh, no.
And I know. And here you are, desperate, right? Your child is calling out for you for help. It's physical, it's emotional. You can feel that. And my hands were tied. What was I going to do at that point? And I think that, I would certainly do it different. The advice I give moms, what little we have to offer up, comes from the fact that I've really tried just about everything. Along the way, I've made every mistake possible, believing that the justice system, this legal system, was just, and that I would be the good girl and follow along and, follow the rules. Here are the rules. What I didn't know is that we uppity women who are complaining about the system or what's happening to our children, as if I had the right to complain at all. And that's what I woke up one day and said, oh, the women in the United States don't have equal rights.
Right.
And we don't have equal rights. And if we could say it louder, because most women do not know it. But so you're in the middle of this situation and you're talking about the Constitution. You're talking about, the 14th Amendment and due process, and you're talking about equal representation. I went through every dime I had. He went after all my employment. He stalked me and harassed me. He ensured that I couldn't make a living in my career. He went from county to county, job to job. When I would seek jobs, even in retail, he would notify the business owner and try to, it was all this slander. And I'd love to find an attorney who'd like to go after this guy. He's got a lot of money for defamation of character. That's what he was doing. He was trying to ensure that I was completely incapacitated. And he's really done a marvelous job doing that. And the system rewards these bullies. And, they're happy in a pay-to-play court to accept one motion after the next. They fail to hold these guys in contempt while they violate court orders, yet they falsify and this fraud in the court that's been happening in my case. Every attorney knows about this, and the county and the supervisors and the DA's office. And over the years, I've sent every letter that every mom does. I've participated in every movement, every campaign to bring attention. My congressman has, I talk about stalking. Yes, I stalked my congressman who had an office just down the street from the courthouse, and he served on the board of directors for the Napa Emergency Women's Services. And when I was married to this man, we helped raise money for his campaign.
Wow.
Yeah. So, it's like one of these kind of entrenched communities, and yet no one will take responsibility. No one will address these violations that are happening. And all along, my daughter is growing up in this oppressive home where the only person she's not allowed to talk to is her mother. the only person, in the meantime, there's very little supervision for my daughter. She's had one issue after the next, and in 2010, after another CPS event, he was able to get a no-contact order.
Wow.
And, it was one of these ex parte motions, so that's an emergency order. I had 24-hour notice and went into court, and all of these false allegations were being made. Saying that I physically assaulted my daughter, that I'm emotionally abusive, and I'm being put on a no-contact order. And I did get some, I fought for the right to get a therapist, to do some, I wanted not to lose contact with my daughter, because I did feel like I've done some education in attachment disorders, and it's that loss, it's that break in contact where they can really manipulate the mind of the child. So I wanted to have, as quickly, to be able to address these issues and have us kind of get underneath it and have her continue to have contact with her mother. So after 8 weeks of this, I go into court, and the Minors Council has filed a court report. She never interviewed me, and she puts in the court report that my daughter reports that I'm saying bad things about her dad in these supervised visitation appointments. And I got that therapist on the stand, and she states very clearly for the court that we never once spoke about her father. This didn't happen. Mm-hmm. Of course, that's completely ignored, and the therapist that they were sending my daughter to, the Minors Council stated for the court that she held privilege and refused to allow the therapist to come in, and the judge upheld that statement, and wouldn't allow me to cross-examine, wouldn't allow me any evidence to, all this due process violations were happening in this case where I'm losing custody and I'm not being allowed to fight. And so I then went on supervised visitation through the same agency where I once did supervised visitation. I got to really learn on the other side. This has been my evolution. This has been my learning, that, I never believed that I never knew how poorly the system really was working and what little voice women have in it. And worse yet, no voice at all, the children who are being abused. Mm-hmm. So the judge put on the record that I have an anger management problem, and and sent me to anger management classes, and I was put on supervised visitation because I had an irrational and false belief that my child was molested.
All right. Okay. Yeah. We're always crazy, right? That's the standard answer over the last 3,000 years. Is when a woman protests against injustice, then we are just labeled crazy.
Yeah. I think right now, if we could break down all the places where it is, as Aaliyah says, rigged, I think the judges are actually like parking ticket maids. They're actually they're not even listening most of the time. They have a formula that they're following. And when I would hear this judge repeat like a rote decision that I have heard countless times as I sat and did court watch for other moms, it was like there is a script, and when the mother fills out this bubble and this bubble and this bubble, this is what the judge is going to say. This is the court services that they're going to demand. these are the social services that the mother has to go pay for. And that's really what's happening is for most of the protective moms, a lot of us, like I didn't have a mental health evaluation. They refused to allow that. So we have a judge who has not only diagnosed me, but she's also prescribing. And it's now followed me for the last 6 years, is that that court order is following me. And every time I get back into court on a reconsideration, they go back to this order, which is I need some kind of I need to be in regular counseling, and the Minors Council states that the child is not safe with me and is scared of me and doesn't want to be with me. And in the meantime, along on this parallel side of all of this happening is my ex would from time to time allow me visits. And it's sickening. It's sickening to say allow, right? We're under their boots. But honestly, when we're in this situation, we're really willing to do anything. My daughter was really suffering. I certainly was suffering. But I think what is not understood by, I don't know if it's not understood or they just don't care. And they're part of this corruption and underlying evil that's going on. You know, we also have judges who are out to lunch. They have no understanding of child growth and development, and the father, in the terms of the best interest, even if the kid was abused and requires all of this medical and psychological attention and is being traumatized, he can pay for all of the services. So therefore, we're going to leave it in his care, because a good father is really a good provider under these kind of terms. So that's what I was coming up against. And every person, all of these flying monkeys that we come in contact with, I had friends who, we question who are our friends in the middle of all of this. People who had regular contact with my child and knew that I was under this, under restraining orders, and yet he was agreeing for my daughter to see me, and they were aware of it, and I would ask them, could you put something in writing to me since you've had a discussion with him, and he's agreed, because this would be helpful when I go back to try and prove perjury or this fraud in the court. He's paying for these no contact orders, but at the same time he's then allowing this contact. And I was told by this friend, well, let me call him and see if it's okay. And I just scratched my head about where the loyalties are, those alliances, and why people, not just the bystanders, but the enablers. And I've experienced so much of that, the gaslighting, the gatekeepers. And those are the judges, and those are the minors' councils, and those are the executive directors of the domestic violence services and all the other social services that were in my area as I went from person to person, agency to agency. All of these same organizations that I once worked for or volunteered for were now not available to help me or assist me in trying to address, the care and the trauma, and and along the way, the trauma to me, and mothers don't at first do not address their own trauma, and the men do. When they go into court, like my ex got restraining orders and used in the effort to get the restraining order that he had sleepless nights. He was having to go to get on medication to calm himself
Yeah, it's from all that pornography.
Right,
from watching all that pornography and all that child abuse. He got sleepless nights.
Sleepless nights because he's so terrified that I'm going to tell. I mean, this is how they get gag orders, right? So that the victim now is restrained from communicating about their abuse.
Yep.
And that's what I've been living under. So in 2013, my ex was allowing some additional contact. And actually, if I back up, 2010, it would be a year before I would see my daughter or talk to her. And there was a camp that I had helped develop and worked in every year, and she came that summer. I wish I had photos or film of this long-awaited embrace. You know, your child is suffering, so, and I don't want to, hurt your heart, because I know it's been at least a year, since you've seen your daughter.
I haven't had any contact with my daughter since May 9th, 2015. Yeah, so no contact at all. I don't know if she's still alive. So, yeah.
Very frightening, and no one will help. No one, I'd ask people, can you send me pictures or can you help me make contact? And so when your child needs you most, I wasn't there, and it was so painful. It hurt my heart. She shared with me that there were times when she cried into her pillow and she wanted to call me and wasn't able to. Our children are told things about us that are horrible. Right? It's meant to demean us. It's meant to, undermine our authority with our child, to make us appear to be, violent or angry and crazy. That's the big bugaboo now, is to say that, like you said, to say that we're crazy. And it goes a long distance. So moms that are even addressing the issues of PTSD, because post-trauma or traumatic, this complex grief and trauma that we're all experiencing, the average person sees PTSD as the affliction of returning military who then are angry and violent and having these kind of experiences. And so if you attribute that, when moms use these issues to address what's been happening and this debilitating kind of grief that they're experiencing, it gets used against them. And well, this is the reform needed throughout our society that we're still addressing. This is really a revolution we're talking about. And, but for now, this is one of the many tools that are used to continue to oppress the mom. And if she brings up any issues, that too gets used against her, regardless of whether or not it was inflicted upon her by the perpetrator. They still use that as a character flaw, and
it's everything you say or do gets used against you. I've talked to moms who cry in court and then they lose custody because they cried, and I also know moms who didn't cry in court and they lost custody because they didn't cry. So whatever you do or whatever emotion you display, it all gets used against you, basically.
Absolutely. We're in a no-win. It's damned if you do and damned if you don't. If you stay, CPS has the formula for taking your kids because you put them in danger. If you leave, they take your kid because you're saying bad things about the dad and alienation. Yeah. And, you're committing this crime when in fact it's in good faith. And the system is set up to continue to reward these entitled men. And it's really hard for people to understand this is not a gender-neutral issue. This really is the continuation of oppression on women. And while there are good men who suffer some of, tragedies around these custody orders, we're talking about moms who gave birth to their children, and now they don't have right to raise them and protect them. And that, I think when you get down to that, and even to sit with men, unless they're abusers, to sit with them and say, listen, there has to be a place of priority here too. This is the mother-child bond is a real thing. We need science. We need, again, science to prove what is natural and important, that this traumatic event that's happening to the child is the most profound experience in a child's life to be removed from their mother. And for the mother, the same is true, that this event is traumatizing her, and while she's trying to fight to protect the child, that she's being totally annihilated. And when you turn around after years and years of doing this, I've fallen into homelessness. I've spent every dime I had. I've had to change my career over and over again as he stalked and harassed me. The court is either they're rewarding. They definitely reward these men while they fail to acknowledge what it is they're doing. And the DA piece in this is, if I were a stranger and this man was stalking, harassing, abusing in this fashion, I would imagine, and I know that it to be true, that they would go after him. But because of the relationship between the victim and the perpetrator, that's how they decide whether or not they're going to prosecute. So, that's what we're witnessing, is that this violence against women is allowed when they are the intimate partner. And we're seeing it every day throughout our country and across the world. And we're still in the midst of this evolutionary change where women assume more power, and we turn the page on this patriarchal rule. But until then, there's going to continue to be a lot of suffering, and until more women speak out, because what we've been trained to do is to be quiet. And for those people who speak out, we're punished severely. And this is one of the ways that we're punished. This is an act of war to kidnap a child. And basically, this is a child for ransom. Had they told me how much I would have to come up with in order to get my daughter back, that would have been an interesting bill from the court. Instead, I was paying for the right to have him take my daughter. And I sat in a courtroom when he got full custody, and everyone left. He left as he's walking out of the courtroom, and I'm handed a bill by the court reporter. And, as I tried to get to my feet, my knees buckled, and I, fell in my seat. I thought, well, gee, if I just passed out here in the courtroom and they had to carry me out on a stretcher, maybe that would make the paper. I understand that they walk over dead corpses in the courthouse and it never makes the paper. So, the paper is in small towns and big communities. The media is very well controlled. What they're going to talk about in the media and in our community, this story is never going to be discussed. So, I'm currently on a no contact order, and in 2014, my daughter and I, who had regular contact by phone, my daughter had contacted me by Facebook. I felt like I was parenting by Facebook. And
wow.
yeah, and at least I had contact. And that was great. And she was asking me things, and sometimes it was very frustrating because I could hear a script. Sometimes there were statements being made to me about me or about situations that were untrue, and I would be kind of caught up in the trap sometimes. So I was never really sure, was this a setup,
Mhm. Yeah.
But I went along the way, and we eventually made an agreement in January of 2014 for my daughter to be with me every weekend, and she was with me on spring break. And 2 years ago, to this date, my daughter was at her dad's house and took a marijuana candy bar out of his freezer that she mistook for a chocolate candy bar. It said cannabis chocolate candy or something, candy bar. And she was unaware of what that meant and thought that it was just a quick treat before she was going to go to a singing event.
Oh,
and
no.
when I got there to pick her up, she was with a friend. Her friend did not eat it. She had a popsicle, and my daughter ate the candy bar. And I dropped the other child off at the singing event and decided, you're in that pickle, right? You're damned if you do, damned if you don't. If I don't do anything, if I were to have dropped her off without doing anything, she would have had something happen in public, and would that have been the opportunity for somebody to recognize that this happened and there was neglect or something? But I wanted to ensure that she was safe. She was having a lot of, this whole body high was happening to a child who had never had this experience, and she was very anxious and she was very upset. She was having breathing problems. So while trying to calm her down, I decided I would take her to an emergency clinic, and the local one had been closed, so I'd take her up to the emergency room. And lo and behold, the doctor on staff was one of the same doctors who had been involved with one of the CPS events and was thoroughly coerced into believing that I was crazy and my ex was this super dad, and he, out of his ignorance and arrogance, he calls CPS, and CPS, who will not participate in family law matters, was there to ensure that the father who had custody was there to get my daughter. And I would then be charged. My ex had gone to the police after that to tell them that I committed, that I was kidnapping my daughter, and the DA then charged both of us with violating a court order, and we were charged separately. And I was thrilled beyond belief, believe it or not, because I was going to finally get in front of a jury and be able to tell them about the perjury and the abuse and address the various issues. And instead, they offer him a plea agreement. He files another restraining order, a collects order, something with more teeth, one of these domestic violence charges, and advises him that he must follow it to the letter of the law. And they vacate the charges against me. And over the last 2 years, what I was unaware of under these charges, any third party on my behalf who contacts my daughter is also a violation of the restraining order. So I currently have 6 charges against me from people making contact with my daughter. And earlier this year on her birthday, I brought her yellow roses. Hadn't seen her for a year, and I was arrested at the house. I was in jail for 6 days. And
you were arrested and put in jail for 6 days because you delivered yellow roses to your daughter?
That's correct. I am a violent criminal who delivers roses to their child.
This is outrageous.
Here's the thing, too. I mean, I've had a no-contact order for 6 years. We've been working around that order, knowing that something could happen because it's all based on my ex-husband's vindictive and, psychologically abusive behavior. What is the whim? If we participate under his rules, then we can do these things. But he looked bad when this whole marijuana thing happened, and he made it sound like I did something. He actually said in the hospital, "Nice try." Nice try. What do you mean, nice try? Getting her medical help, or what? What was the nice try? That this was, yes, this was an attempt to not only get her help, but maybe someone would see that she is in ongoing danger being under his supervision, that not only has he ignored her well-being, but he consistently puts her in danger. And this was one of those events. And so instead of addressing, they never addressed this, still a Class A, drug offense. And she is a minor, and he had it in his freezer, and nobody ever addressed it. They only addressed the fact that we violated a court order, which most people don't understand. In these pay-to-play courts, this civil court proceeding in family law is they use preponderance, which allows hearsay to be used. What they do is they determine which party is believable. Well, that's where the character assassination comes in. They eventually get the judge to believe that one party is more believable than the other, and it is often the most abusive parent who gets custody, and it just so happens that most often is the father. And men who are seeking full custody of a child they had very little contact with prior to the separation, that needs to come under scrutiny. And
absolutely.
It's not coming under and it's not coming under scrutiny because this, once again, what people don't want to, they just don't want to believe it. They do not want to believe how the system is actually working to continue to oppress women. And they just can't bear to understand it, and we cannot bear, I think we can understand when the courts in Mexico, by the law enforcement, that you can bribe them, that you can get the justice that you want through the green in your pocket. They do not want to believe that that's how our courts in America are also working. Because that would be that's so dangerous to even know that. You know, that their sense of security would be so blown away. And so basically it's just what all of us are experiencing is that when it happens to you, you first go through all of that same process of being completely shocked and not understanding it. And as a teacher and a researcher, now I'm looking at it like an anthropologist, and I'm looking at society, how we reward the bullies, how we participate in that, how we force the silence, and we continue to perpetrate these crimes against the innocent by our own silence, basically creating this jail that we're living in, and we have to keep submitting to all of this. And these, I think of these as pink crimes, you know, being women, that we're basically slaves, not just to the system, but white men can't own slaves anymore, so they marry.
Yep, we are the new slaves, and so are our children.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that, after 10 years, this has been 10 years, and I had a divorce prior to that. I'm also the child of the tender years. My mother was married 4 times. I saw what that was, and I think that we're not talking about reform when people, that's a very interesting word to talk about reform, as if there was something good that was part of the current system that just, and will remove the bad stuff or augment it or whatever. I think we have to look across the country at people and practices in the system that are benefiting women and children, and we have to throw the rest out. We basically have to what we're talking about is throwing out this patriarchal enabling system, because it's victims' voices that are not being heard. We're protecting the rights of men as laws that were written by men. They work perfectly to protect them against not only the government, but accusations. And along the way, we've all been suffering the fraud upon the court, which is this parental alienation and false allegation syndrome, the creation of all of these syndromes, the mad mother syndrome, all of those things. Anytime that a statement is made, we can say bad things about mom in our society, and we can destroy motherhood, but we fund fatherhood and the perpetuation of the patriarchy. We do it through our public policy practices, through these programs for the Health and Human Services, and, marriage acts. And, as you do research and you look at that whole fatherhood manifesto, they were trying to end divorce in America by any means, and that included stealing the children. And if that doesn't work, we'll get child support from those horrible women that are taking their property, daring to leave. And I have that happening too. So not only does my ex go from job to job to ensure that I can't support myself or continue in the courts, then he makes sure the DA he filed for child support, this man who makes more than $250,000 a year, plus has ensured that he gets child support. And so any job I get, a $10 an hour job, he gets half my income. Well, it's really hard to work and live in the Napa Valley on $5 an hour.
It's outrageous. It's a Ponzi scheme. It really is a Ponzi scheme. The entire system is rigged, and it's a pro-abuse system, because the system continues to make money off of these cases as long as they drag on, and that's why they allowed them to drag on over so many years. In your case, more than 10 years now. So it's a source of income for them. That's what this is all about. That's why it's federally funded. And people are not aware that, they're paying for this with their own tax dollars. So, And
what you just said, that's one of those strategies to try and bring up. And I think that during this presidential, run right now, we have to figure out how to get in front of the media on funding issues, on taxpayers funding violence against women and children. And it's not a subject they want to cover, so we have to figure out what's the catchphrase, who's going to say it, and how do we get that out there. And I think one of these issues right now for us is moms need ERA. We've got 2 bills in Congress right now to help extend that ratification period, so that when we get the next 3, we only need 3 more states. to ratify the 19th Amendment. That's 3 more states.
Let's talk about that more. We'll take a little break. We'll take a little music break, and then we'll get into what your organization, Mothers of Lost Children, is doing, because you are working on the ratification of ERA, but also many other ways to, like you said, it's not reforming, but it's overhauling the system from the bottom up, really. And you're doing so many wonderful things to achieve that. So let's take a little break, and then we'll get into that. And I'll let you also finish your story, because I would love to know what the contact is right now with your daughter. So let's take a little break, and then I'll see you on the other side.
Okay.
And welcome back to Hells for Children. And I've been talking with Melissa Barnett of the organization Mothers of Lost Children. And Melissa has been telling us her story, which is great, because she's been doing so much with her organization for other protective moms and their children. And it's great to finally hear her story. And she's been telling us about this no contact order that's been in place since 2010. And we kind of left off at the 2014 point. So I'm kind of curious as to where the case stands now, Melissa.
Well, where the case stands now, and I'm going to be sending out a save the date card, is I'm on trial August 15th for violating restraining orders. And I have no contact with my daughter. There's no communication at all, and since 2014. So
wow.
I delivered the flowers, but I didn't see my child. People have brought things immediately. My ex, after this whole marijuana thing, he filed this newest restraining order in 2014, and he would then invite me to things to see my daughter. She was performing in a show the very day that he filed the restraining order. So either these were setups, or he was then going to get me arrested or use that as a violation, being that I was unaware, because he got an ex parte motion and tells the court that I'm so dangerous that my daughter would be in danger if I knew about the hearing. So unlike the other ex parte motions, I did not get 24-hour notice. I was not in court when he got the temporary order for protection. So I went a few months without knowing. And this was some of the setup for some of these counts against me. And one of the issues that is very challenging is, along the way, I lost the ability to pay for attorneys, and I went into court and asked in the family court for, in California Family Code 2030, the judge shall provide representation when there is a disparity in the income. And at that time, I made under $25,000 a year, working as a kindergarten teacher, and he was making, this $250,000 plus, and the judge who would eventually give him full custody was the same judge that would refuse this 2030. And so I was pro se for quite a while, and that's when I lost custody. I was pro se. So on one hand, it's this lack of representation that may have played a role, or in fact, the representation only eked out the continuous court drama, which was making everybody a lot of money, right? All the attorneys were all making money. So as soon as I became pro se, it was a lot more challenging for me, because it was also so debilitating. that every time I would go into court, regardless of the evidence, witnesses, and statements, I would lose. And so it sets up this kind of, I hate to say it about myself, but yeah, this whole victim kind of thing sets in. You're now a victim of this system, of this corrupt system. How are you ever going to dig out? So that was the setup for me, then having contact with my child outside this court order. So really, a good attorney would file for, a defense of necessity, and they would address the issues of perjury and the fraud upon the court. But I can't afford an attorney right now, so I'm still trying to figure out how to do that. In the meantime, I have a public defender who basically is playing games with the other side and wants me to plea out, the whole she's crazy, and my ex telling, and they're sharing the statements my ex is making about me, that he just wants me to get the help I need.
Yeah, that's what my ex says too.
The help I need, I want, and I've got, friends, right, all of us saying, yes, I should get the help I need. He should be in prison. I should get restitution, millions of dollars in restitution for the trauma that this man has caused. And, my joke on Facebook lately is, I was, I'm interested in healing and supporting each other and lifting each other up, because if you want to go the distance, we really have to take care of ourselves and our health. But the last couple of years has been very traumatizing to me. This no contact is one of the most debilitating experiences. I can attest to that, and I know that for my child. She's had trouble in all sorts of ways. I have heard about, she wasn't able to graduate, and she's done summer classes, and she's now, doing homeschooling. That's another way of isolation, so that nobody will report when she's not doing well or she's underweight and all of these things. So, there's, it's really a debilitating thing. So I'm being encouraged by advocates to go in pro se or to do something. So I'm still trying to see what's going to come of this hearing in August, but I'm going to go in defending motherhood. This is, it was my right to see my daughter. These were false allegations that were made, and that's the kind of attorney that we need, that there are so few of. And the attorneys who do stand up for mothers and children are often their head is on the chopping block, and you can see why.
You can also take your case to a civil grand jury trial. Have you looked into that? Yes, I've filed grand jury complaints, and so I'm awaiting a response. And I've sent them over the years. I've participated with lots of moms in putting together even class, not what you would call a class action, but you would have a whole group of women in a county filed their consolidated cases that these same events are happening to them through their county court. And we haven't seen a positive response. I know some mothers across the country, we've seen little pockets of places where there have been some positive responses. And I really am. I used to be, I was going to say, I am, but I think it's more, I'm quieter about that hopefulness. I used to be that cheerleader for hope. And I think that can really be debilitating during a time when it's still very challenging for us to get ahead. And the experience that I personally have had has really taught me a lot about I need to feel positive and know what the truth is, and to continue to stand in my truth,
and create whatever strength I can around me, but to know that if it failed, it certainly was not my fault. Because
you're doing everything you can, right? And yeah, you're doing everything you can. And I was talking to another protective mom this week, and she was suicidal, and she was saying, it's all my fault, and they're telling me I'm a bad mom. And I told her, I said, look, the most important thing for you right now is not to internalize the dialogue that's happening with the outside world. Whatever they're saying about you, don't internalize it. Don't make that your inner dialogue, because what you know that you love your children and you've done everything you could to protect them, and the fact that the system is enabling the abusers is not your fault. So it's very important to continue to hold your strength in that love that you have and the love that you walked in, and that was the intention and that was the motivation, and there is nothing wrong with that. What's wrong is the way the system responds to the situation, where they're making money off of abuse and making money off of victims, and that you're right. It's important not to get too hopeful about possible solutions, because it's
awful?
such a long road. It's awful. But I do want to mention on air for all the other protective mothers that are listening, because I've mentioned on previous shows how the United States is not ratifying many, if not most, of the United Nations treaties. However, there is an organization called the Organization of American States. If you go and Google that, it's www.oas.org. And you can file a complaint about your case there. They are kind of like the United Nations for the American states, for Northern America, and then Central America and South America. So that is one tip. And another organization that I came across is the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. Like I totally agree with you. It's very hard to stay hopeful, but I really do believe that this is where the pressure needs to come from. The entire United States justice system is basically rotten from the bottom to the top, all the way into federal court. So the only way we can go after the United States and what it's doing to its citizens is by attacking it from the outside in. If we are all massively filing our cases with the Inter-American Court of Human Rights and the Organization of American States, if we do this massively, thousands and thousands of cases, I bet you there would be some kind of change happening. We would be rattling cages, It's an intense process. It's an intense process to do, right? Because you have to write your story out, and you have to attach all the evidence to it. And this is a lot of work. It's very traumatizing to do it. And my advice is to do it, but to pace yourself through it, right? This is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And when you get tired and you feel like you can't take it anymore on an emotional level or a psychological level, or you also have to survive, so you have to work jobs, and, then just pace it. Take a break from it for 2 or 3 weeks, and when you feel like you've re-energized, then work on it again. And this re-energizing period that you take, you need to nurture yourself with things that lift you up, right? You need to nurture yourself with things that support you, supportive people, have supportive people around you, and look and listen to things and participate in activities that make you feel valued and supported, so you can have the strength and energy to tackle another, a couple of weeks of writing on these complaints. That would be my advice for particularly the American protective mothers, to really massively file with the OAS and the Inter-American Court of Human Rights.
So we've organized several opportunities. I know over this 10-year period we've en masse in various times the UN, to the International American Commission on Human Rights. And we actually, in the last round, which is about 2 years ago, a couple of our notable moms did get responses. And I don't know what they take a while to investigate. And one of the most important cases that came out of that was Jessica Gonzalez-Lehrman's case. And if listeners don't know, Jessica Gonzalez, after her children were murdered, she filed a case against the Castle Rock, Colorado law enforcement, addressing the issue of the restraining orders, that they had not enforced them and therefore had violated her rights and liberty rights of her children. And she fails, and she goes to the appeals court, Supreme Court in Colorado, and she fails again. So she goes to the Supreme Court in Gonzalez versus the USA. The statement from the Supreme Court basically is that that law enforcement was not obligated to act on those restraining orders. That's 2011. That statement to the women in the United States is very important, that the lower courts, that the law enforcement, none of them are obligated to enforce the restraining orders. And so they basically have reinforced the idea that restraining orders aren't worth the paper they're written on. And it was Miami University, and it was the ACLU and this international commission that have addressed her case and have made statements about the safety of women in the United States. And I think last year, again, the International Commission looked at the progress being made in respect to Jessica's case. Are the changes being made in law enforcement, in the courts? And they are still seeing that they are not addressing these infractions and put the issues that put women and children in danger, the children of mothers. So, it does, eventually, that's that thing about being hopeful, but not being naive. We have to, like you say, we have to continue the pressure. We have to do it in groups of women. We also have to have an individual voice, these individual stories. And it is very challenging each time we ask moms who are really in pain and, going through all of this to dredge up their story. And it's so actually going through one of these detailed cases to do one of those filings gives you the opportunity to break it down, attach evidence if you have it, and then use that for any other complaint you choose to make, to then take that complaint to your grand jury and to file a complaint in your local grand jury. I think one of the areas that some mothers and groups have pursued still need more work. I think it's actually a gold mine is going after the counties, because you have the Board of Supervisors are accepting, that's the county seat, they accept federal funding. And if they're accepting federal funding that is discriminating against the rights of women, then that's where you can go after them for this discrimination. And that's including any program. See, the only real rights that women have in the United States is under the Civil Rights Amendment of 64. And this one place that says you can attend activities, school, and there can be no gender bias discrimination in federally funded programs. And that's where if we went in groups and if we could find some level-headed either attorneys or moms who are capable of helping to file some discrimination cases against local municipalities and the state and programs that are discriminating, going after the vendors of the fatherhood funding monies and really addressing the discrimination that's happening. And we have to put that kind of pressure on it. And we all do it, and we just have to keep at it. When I say I'm not hopeful,
well, one of the things that you've mentioned so well is how the fathers go after our employers, and my ex is doing this too. That they want to destroy you, and so you're bouncing up against that and trying to hold on to your job, and and then they try to hit you with this child support and attorney fees and guardian ad litem fees, and they just wage this constant war against you, and so it's the ability to try to block that out. And try to not engage in that as much as you can, and try and make a living somehow while putting forth the effort to file these complaints massively. And all these different levels. You're right. Once you've written it out and you've attached the evidence, you can file this now everywhere. And yes, it is a lengthy process. You need to, take into account it might take 1 year or maybe 2 years, and sometimes even longer. However, if we all continuously do this, then that would be a way forward. And one of the things that I kind of wanted to mention on this show with you right now is that we need funding. We need to have a couple of moms who are paid to put together these cases for the rest of the mothers who are too traumatized to do it. If you would give me a full-time job doing this is what I would do. I would just put together cases with individual moms every day. I would be working on that so we can file thousands of cases within a 2-year time span. I mean, this would be a way to go forward. We need an actual office. We need equipment. We need, like I said, we need some people on there who are legal experts as well, who can help us with the filing, with the proper ways to file, the forms to file, where to file, how to follow up after filing so you get a case number, all of these. This entire process, and also the suggestions that you're making, we can't do this only as volunteers. So if there are any listeners out there who are benefactors and who have listened to this show multiple times and understand what we're up against, I'm putting this out there to you. Please help us. We don't get any federal funding as mothers. There is no motherhood.gov like there is the fatherhood.gov, right?
Right.
We need that too. We need funding to fight this inequality. We need funding to get the Equal Rights Amendment passed. We need funding to get constitutional rights of women and children added to the Constitution. There's so much to do, and we cannot do this all traumatized in our spare time. So please, anyone out there listening, please contact us. Please contact Melissa at her website, via her website, mothersoflostchildren.org. And let's start really pushing this to the next level would be my suggestion. Now, Melissa, tell us about the demonstration at the White House you had about 2 weeks ago, was this? You have this every year,
yes.
right?
Well, we go several times. Actually, we go, some years we go more times. Sometimes it's twice a year. We go in the spring and in the fall. And Connie Valentine loves the Mother's Day March, and this year I was not able to join her, and instead went with Aaliyah to the Code Pink a few days before that, so that we could spread our message out that this is happening and bring more groups in. And there was a handful of moms each year. We gain more moms who join us at the White House and join us in the lobbying. Mothers of Lost Children more of an era than it is an individual organization with, we as some of the moms who have taken on some leadership roles and administrative roles were working on it all year long, all day long, taking calls and doing lobbying efforts besides these couple of trips, besides this last trip to Washington. There's follow-up. There's contacting the Congress senators, the caucuses. We've met with the Victims' Rights Caucus over many years. And it's follow-up. It's developing relationships. We're learning how to be lobbyists in a system where women's voices are all but muted. We have very little representation. And unless you go to Washington, unless you go to the Hill with a bill to sign, something to sign on to, a resolution, something that they can get behind, really there's not a lot to talk about. Then it ends up being an education. And that's really what our efforts are. So every movement needs different arms to make social change, because it's going to be through art and culture and through various education that we're going to then be able to create healthy public policy and make the changes necessary. So we have to keep showing up, and that's very important. It's very important that mothers come to the White House, that they contact their congressmen, their senators, and that they continue throughout the year to develop a relationship with their local offices and then go and see them and send them information. And we've seen some, positive changes. We're starting to see some movement and open new doors. It's a process. And if we think that going there, you get really caught up, right, in that whole Pollyanna thing. It's like, oh, they were so positive and they heard us, and we walk away, and it's and nothing's, happens for a little while. But just think about the fact that we're, chipping away at this, big mountain. And at some point, it's going to come down. We're going to hit a max. We're going to max out. We're going to have talked to enough representatives who are concerned about these issues. And I certainly think that if you're contacting representatives, first look at how they vote on certain bills. Are they interested in trafficking issues? Do they have a family history of abuse, of foster care? Those are the people you want to go after. And we can keep trying to educate the naysayers and the rest, but really I think that's wasted energy. We have to look for our friends, both in our local politics and on the Hill. And for me, I was really in an entrenched area in the Napa Valley, this wealthy community that was going to keep rewarding this man who had all this money and power. That's when I, over the years have been talking to women about us going to Washington, and that's when we decided. And listen, long before mothers of lost children were praying in the park and making plans to go to Washington, there were other mothers before us doing it. And Coral, lost her 8 children, including a nursing child, a year before the mothers in Davis were praying in the park. And Marilee McLean was out there protesting. And thanks to her, she is doing this work with Moms Fight Back, and she is out there fighting, and she has joined us at the White House many times. And Patrice Lenowitz from the Nurtured Parent Support Group is very active in New Jersey, and they're having some exciting events trying to overturn, a reappointment of a very dangerous judge. And this is the work that is so important, is when these judges come up for re-election, we have to be there. And in addition to that, we can also, if moms have some money or can raise some money, we can also file recalls. And this is when you can then get statements in the paper, and while you're collecting signatures for your recall, you can be talking to people about this crisis, not only as a result of this dangerous judge, but the policies and practices in California, the failure of the Judicial Commission that is enabling these bad judges by allowing them to continue regardless of all of these horrendous complaints. And we can take that information to our not only assembly members and senators, but send it to our federal representatives, our congressmen and senators. Look what we're doing in your district. Are you aware of this bad judge and the policies that allow these judges to continue? And so when we start putting those pieces together, then our representatives to Congress can start seeing that what's happening in their state, like Corsica right now. It is the supreme effort of advocates, mainly women and mothers, who have been working on social media to spread the word about that bad judge in Michigan, and involving the National Organization for Women and getting a statement. And that kind of power of moms, advocates, concerned citizens coming together and using their voices via social media, calling the courthouses, calling the media, these kind of efforts are benefiting. And I like to see, us take what's happening with Judge Corsica coming under the commission, that we take every judge and we call them Lisa Gorsica. I've got a Lisa Gorsica in Napa, California, and she took custody away from a fit, loving, safe mother and placed my child in danger. And we have a Lisa Gorsica in every courthouse across California and across the nation, from California to Maine. And if we can take that case and transpose it onto every one of these bad judges and use the formula that was used there and keep at it, keep the pressure up, and let our representatives in Congress know and find our friends. And really that's the effort of the mothers lobbying, is
just for
trying to find solutions.
Just for the listeners who are not familiar with this case, it's Oakland Judge Lisa Gorsica who actually was charged with misconduct in her handling of a contentious custody case in which she ordered 3 children locked up in juvenile detention. And she tried to block these charges of misconduct last Friday, but she lost. And there's going to be a Michigan Supreme Court case about this particular judge, and she is facing possible disciplinary action. And so, exactly. So once we see how this plays out, we can then basically copy-paste what's happened in her case for other judges. Another thing that you mentioned was the action of Patrice Lenowitz, and I kind of want to touch on that because this just happened a week ago. Patrice Lenowitz, together with the Stop Abuse campaign and other victim rights advocates and activists and protective parents, rented a bus, and they called themselves the Family Court Freedom Riders, and they actually went to New Jersey to a New Jersey Senate Judiciary Committee. This was on May 23rd, where there were tenure appointments for 7 Superior Court judges, including an appellate division judge. And by their actions, by actually going there and protesting the nomination of 2 of these particular judges, they were actually able to block the nomination of one of the judges. Which is really important. This is Judge Askandon. He actually awarded custody of 3 children to a ranking member of the Bonanno crime family, and this man actually became an informant. And so this particular case was presented during that particular nomination event last week, and Judge Askandon then did not get the nomination. So this is extremely important. They were very, very successful in doing this, and I applaud these actions. We need more of this. Rent a bus, get everyone on the bus, and go to these particular go to these meetings.
Exactly. Get on the
and
bus,
speak
ladies.
up. Get on the bus.
Pain into purpose and power, because this was such a powerful action, and it's hard in entrenched areas when you can't even find the moms, to get on the bus. And fortunately and unfortunately, there were quite a lot of victims, and luckily, a group of supported mothers. And that actually is the formula for New Jersey right now, is you had long-standing advocates for women. Sandra Ramos, who started the Supporting Our Sisters, was involved in that action. And Sandra is at the White House every year, and she puts a busload of shelter women and joins us in Washington. And she continues every day in her personal life, mothers, and to get on the bus. And that's it. It's when we see a situation happening, like in California, we've had a couple of opportunities for recall. Katie Cagle had a little boy, Wyatt, who was murdered by his father. And she went to court to try, she had evidence, she had a suicide note that he was going to kill himself and the child. And the judge not only gave custody, but then and basically treated her, laughed about the situation and treated her as, vindictive and crazy. And after her child had been killed, her family rallied around her and her community, and they started a recall event, and that judge eventually came off the bench. And the same in Solano County, one of our other moms, Jennifer Green, started a recall campaign. And we really need other moms and advocates, concerned citizens, to join those kind of efforts. And it may not be every case. We may not have enough strength or evidence in a particular story. We may need to think about joining, helping other cases and consolidating the stories, like what's happening in New Jersey. That was an individual story that shared in that Senate confirmation, but it was a consolidation of stories of other mothers, litigants that helped drive that. And they were there to testify that that judge was dangerous. And it would be, and the other part is that the politics of concerned citizens, that I'm a voting citizen, and I'm going to vote with my wallet, and I'm going to vote with my voice. I'm going to vote like a mother. I'm going to I'm going to call those offices, and I'm going to let other concerned citizens know, like what's happening in Virginia, if I could zig back to ratifying the Equal Rights Amendment in the United States. You would be surprised if people would go to ERA Now and look at what states have not ratified. And if you live in one of those states, you should look to see in any of the last opportunities for ratification who the senators are in Congress, in your state Congress, who are voting against equal rights for women. And in Virginia, they had a second vote, and there are still 30 senators who are voting against the ratification. And we should be lobbying and making sure that everyone knows that those senators do not want the equal rights for women. They don't want equal protection, equal pay. Every woman in the state of Virginia should know that. And in every state where you are, we should be involved, because that representation, those representatives, if they're voting against ratifying the ERA, it says a lot about what else they're doing, how they're voting on other issues related to the rights and protection of women and children. That's just a snapshot that tells us that person is not safe, and I should not continue to vote for them moving forward. And that's how voting like a mother is not just vote them in on the concerns that I also have for myself, my children, my country. But if they're not serving me, then you vote them out. And that negative press during election periods is very important. And that's why this New Jersey, those women, those advocates did it just right. They did an excellent job, and it should be applauded and supported, and it should be mirrored. And if we can gather strength state by state in the same process, what's happening in Gorsuch's case, what's happening in New Jersey, can happen anywhere. We just have to build up that coalition of people to band together to go after those bad judges and to bring attention to our elected officials and put them on notice. I mean, really put them on notice, because on one hand you can vote by way of being positive, or you can turn it on them and shame them.
Yes,
for the bad
shame them and embarrass them, and this is what you do through social media. And if we all do this massively, then the mainstream media will start paying attention as well, because we can say, hey, you're not paying attention to this, but here's hundreds of or thousands of moms putting this out there, so eventually they have to give us attention. And the other thing that has been happening over the last couple of weeks is in Santa Clara County in California, there's a group of anonymous folks who are together with WikiLeaks have been uncovering evidence of judges who are making so much money off of these cases, and they're actually investing this money, and so they're digging up all the bank accounts of these judges, and which is excellent. So I want to thank Anonymous for joining us in the battle, and I really hope that they will start expanding their efforts to a national and an international level, because this is happening everywhere across the globe. We need a Panama Papers type of operation into the judicial branches of the countries that are violating human rights of mothers and children, and really dig up the money that's being made off of victimizing us and our children. So, this is my shout out to Anonymous, and please expand your efforts, because we need to dig up all this evidence. Yep.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly what you're saying. Santa Clara has had a very strong movement, litigants who have been collecting evidence over quite a period of time. And so that is where, with Anonymous getting involved, or whoever gets involved with such a movement, that there is a body of evidence that can be used, that can then open those doors and file RICO charges. And Karen Wolf's work on, she filed a federal RICO charges in her state, and that's an amazing effort. You've got Sue Skip that's doing some work in her state and addressing disability rights and violations. And there are many, many, I mean, even though, like I said, individually when we go into state courts, it feels like our efforts are futile. And sometimes it is, and so we have to really look, is this where I want to put my money and my effort? Or can I instead file these other complaints, join these other actions? And for me personally, that's where I had to go for a while, and is join bigger efforts. So I had a small organization before joining the efforts of other mothers across the country. I didn't know, and so I think we're in a really different time. Social media and the efforts of mothers to encourage other advocates and mothers to join actions on social media, this has been the most potent piece of this social justice movement. And that's so for any issue that's going on right now, is that if the media is not covering it, both in the United States or globally, it is the people. This is the power of the people. This is the press of the people. And for those writers and documentarians, Phyllis Chesler is writing again about this issue, and there are so few feminist writers who are addressing these violations, and thank God for her. And there are several other notable writers who are addressing these issues, so that we have, we can send those articles out. And I'm in total agreement with you that it's going to be the global and international attention on the United States, because the United States goes to war fighting issues that they themselves, we ourselves, violate here at home, violating the rights of women and children.
Well put.
And so it will be the international, I think, attention that will point back at the United States. Do you know we're 35 on the list of the worst places for mothers? I mean, it's like we don't have pregnancy rights. We're fighting for reproductive rights, the right to have and hold our children.
Mm-hmm.
This is the most basic human right, our liberty rights, and we violate these rights every day in courts across the nation.
Yeah, we need we need the right to life people to join us, right? So if you are against if you're against abortion, then join us, because we are trying to just keep our children. They are being aborted from us after birth. So how about jumping on that bus with us then to help us keep our children, and also
35 states. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to also
rapists get custody. I mean, that's
exactly.
What an insanity.
Exactly. And the Stop Abuse campaign is also doing wonderful work. Andrew Willis of the Stop Abuse campaign just presented 27,000 signatures to Peter Mooney, the top advisor to Senate Majority Leader John Flanagan in New York. And Andrew Willis, he said, we'd like you to have this petition with these 27,000 signatures signatures so that you know the people of New York and wider don't believe that you should be standing in the way of this bill because children are continuing to be molested and raped. You know, they are presenting bills, the Stop Abuse campaign, to make sure that child abuse is stopped at the legislative level. And this is really important. This is really important work that they're doing. It's called the Safe Child Act. So for people who are new to this, please Google the Stop Abuse campaign and also Mothers of Lost Children. Is that also the way that the listeners can get in touch with you, Melissa, by going on your website?
Sure. On the contact page, there's Melissa at mothersoflostchildren.org. You can send me a note. You know, we're all working in networks together and supporting each other's actions, and the Safe Child Act came real close. The work of advocate Dara Carlin, who marches with Mothers of Lost Children, she has been very successful in the state of Hawaii, part of the same statute of limitation reform acts also. And that's really also the bandwagon to get on, and that's also the work of the Stop Abuse campaign. Andrew is very active, Melanie Blow, very active in New York, and just a national statement about the statute of limitation reform acts. We have some very important, Marcy Hamilton, for people who are concerned and interested in knowing about your own state. What are the statute of limitations when an adult child of sexual assault decides that they're ready to pursue justice? What are the rules in their state? And you'd be very surprised by the way that our criminal justice system interferes with the rights of victims. And that's our big issue right now, is how do we strengthen the rights of victims to at least be equal to the rights of the criminal.
That's right. Very well put. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today, Melissa. It's been really courageous of you to share your personal story. I'm glad everyone's finally heard what's happening to you in your personal life with your daughter. And I can only hope that the case in August will bring you and your daughter relief and will reunite you. Please let us know if you need a court watch. We'll organize it for you.
Thank you.
And thank you for all that you do with Mothers of Lost Children for all of these years. The persistence in that is really admirable. So you're an awesome activist. I have so much respect for you. I'm so happy you're in this world doing what you're doing. So thanks for being on the show and sharing that with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm so honored to have participated today, and the work that you're doing is so important to bring attention and expose this corruption. Thank you.
We'll go on. Operation Expose continues, everybody. So thanks for listening today, and I hope you all tune in again next week for Hell is for Children. Bye-bye, Melissa. I'll be seeing you around.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
See you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.